Hey there. I didn't see you come in. I was just about to do some science. What's science, you ask? Oh, well, let me tell you. So, I'm going to give you the big picture idea of where science is currently at in terms of like, how do all of these concepts and terms like make you think? Like, what's the fundamental picture about the fundamental nature of reality that we have obtained via science? And so that picture that we've seen is basically, it's very electrical in nature. The electromagnetic force is responsible for the immediate experience that we have of nearly everything. And so the next couple of chapters, we're going to be on the composition of the atoms, the behavior, like in the behavior of matter, the properties of matter, and then like the compositions of what's called atoms, or what's called elements. Like, what are the tiniest little Lego blocks of reality? What's the stuff made out of? Right. So there's a long tree of like how this concept has developed, like the idea of a thing in general. And I've tried to show people some videos on that, but it's too boring. It's too boring, and it's too dense. So what's been found is, or not what's been found, but this is where the picture's at, I guess, is that the way that the Legos work, atoms like carbon. So carbon is one of the main Legos that makes up your body, like the substance, the stuff. How is it all tied together? You have these tiny positive cores called the nucleus, and then around that is this like electromagnetic field, this electrical field of potential. And it kind of sits around it like, you could imagine it being stuck around it like the way that the water is stuck to the earth. And what seems to happen, like by looking at cymatic research and plasma research and stuff like that, is that this vibrates or jiggles for some reason, kind of dependent on what seems to be the structure of the inner core. And so the vibration of this like positive magnet shakes, or it shapes this electrical field. So look at the cymatics videos that we did in class, or Google it, and it'll cause that electrical field to take a shape, depending on the structure of the inner core, which is dependent on the number of like protons and neutrons, or the proton-electron pairs. That causes the atoms to take this shape, and so these are shapes of the negative electricity around the atom, and so they exist in these shells. So there's still like a shell, and then the extra proton causes a vibration that causes an arm to go out, and these arms are like electrical arms, and so it's like lightning bolts. It's like electricity reaching out in these directions, and then if they arc up and connect with another element, if the geometry's right, if the charge is right, if the opportunity is right, you can get an electrical connection, and it's like fusing two magnets together, and there starts to be like a bond, and so then this just becomes what's called a shared orbital. So these are tiny. We're talking like a gazillion. Like, this is the smallest, like whatever you could ever conceptualize as the smallest thing. 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd is is how you have to convert atoms of an element into kilograms. So carbon is element number 6, and it has a number of 12, like 12 protons, or 12 proton electron pairs or whatever, 6 protons, 6 neutrons. If you have 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd carbon Legos, you have like, I think 12 grams of it, I believe is the conversion. I haven't been into moles for a while, but it's something like that. It's either 12 grams or 12 kilograms or something like that. But it's, so you're talking a tiny 6.02 times 10 to the 23rd is a very, very small subdivision of mass. Like that's a big incomprehensible number. Like we're thinking incomprehensibly tiny. We're saying that this is the behavior of electricity at the tiniest possible conceivable scale, and it seems to have this behavior down here for some reason. So, you know, these will bond, and then this, you know, you can picture a chain of these, all these Legos tied together, and the shared electrical field is like an ocean. It's like a shared ocean, an electricity, a current, a scaffolding that's moving back and forth around. It's wanting to, the electricity is wanting to stick to the atom as tightly as possible, the same way that water is wanting to fall to the surface of the earth. It just wants to find ground, like water wants to be flat, right? So the electricity around the atom also wants to be flat around it in just a sphere, but it's vibrating in a certain way, and so that causes an ocean wave to come up. And so this is what you would see of as an electron, basically. It's the electrical field around the atom rising up, and that's what creates charge. So the basis of neutral matter is charged the same way that water and earth is water resting on earth is charged. There's a separation there, and it's not going to get any lower. So the lowest state of electricity is like water resting on ground. And then if you manage to pile up the electricity, like by applying a frequency to it, so you can apply a frequency like the way that we did in class, and that causes a wave pattern to come up. Or you can apply a frequency to it by doing this to water, like just going up and down and causing waves, or blowing on it with a storm, right? So there's any number of ways that you can cause waves to happen in water. What seems to be happening at the atomic level is that the protons, the inside of matter, seems to be vibrating in such a way that it causes these wave patterns to pop out that are called molecular orbitals. And it's just the shape of these clouds caused by the vibration of the nucleus. It's like directing light. It's like directing plasma with magnets. It's like how the magnetism of the inner core is moving, and so that's going to direct the electrical fluid. And so, like when it rises up because of that vibration, you get this electron, and so that's each atomic orbital is like a pool, and it can only have so many waves on it, like the same way that a guitar string can only have so many waves on the guitar string, like that are at the nodes. Each electrical orbital of an atom, like each electrical, like the areas of this electrical potential around these protons can vibrate. And so then that vibration takes the electricity up and away from the atom, the same way that a wave of water comes up. And so now this is charged, and it wants to go anywhere that's low. Right? So this is what's actually maintained, this is what's actually driving the force of magnetism. This is gravity. Right? That's the proton matrix at the core of matter is gravity, and so that's drawing all the fluid to itself. Like, so all of this fluid here is drawn down. All of it's drawn down equally, pretty much, especially at these scales. When you get a vibration or a wave moving through it, like, or if you've piled the water, like if you could pile water like in a water tower, that's a big wave. That's just a big static wave that's not going anywhere. It's a big pile of water. a wave is a big pile of water, but there's this energy pattern moving through the water, and the movement of that energy pattern is lifting the water up into a pile. So that's an electromagnetic wave. An electromagnetic wave is a wave that's moving through the electrical field, the electrical field within which we perceive the event of electrons. There's a wave, an electromagnetic wave moves through that. That's what we call light, X-rays, gamma rays, radio waves, is this wave moving through the electromagnetic field. And as it moves, it lifts charge up away from the ground state. And so that's like a big mound of water, and that's charged. And so it moves through the electron orbitals. It moves through that electrical field, and as it moves, it's the movement, the magnetic field, causes it to lift up and away from the positive substrate, the scaffolding, and then set the electrical potential right back down where it found it as the wave moves forward. And so it kind of rolls, as a wave moves through an electrical field, it takes all the ether, and rotates it, which is what we call that is a magnetic field. The movement of the ether, or the pressure of it from having a charge, gravity, that's the electric field. Or if it's rotating as it goes by, I'll explain this picture in a second. That's the magnetic. So as these waves go through, they pick charge up. Like you could imagine a still water that doesn't have any wave in it. If you put a wave into it, it goes by. And as the wave goes by, it picks charge up, brings this charge up into existence, and then puts it back down as it keeps going. But it gives this appearance of this moving charge. Even though if you go in and look at it, it's this non-physical, non-energetic energy. You could view the electricity as energy, right? So this energy moving through the energy is picking up the electricity and putting it back down, but it's doing it in a pattern that makes it look like it's traveling. That makes it look like a solid object. And it's obviously not. Like the wave particle duality thing is, I think it's kind of obvious that we're a wave. And so when a wave looks at a wave, you're going to perceive and think of another wave in the same types of terms that you're thinking of yourself. So of course the wave function is going to collapse into an object if you consider yourself an object looking at another object. Like, of course that's going to happen. And I think it's obvious that like all of this stuff is waving in the electromagnetic field, the ether, which seems to be intimately tied with consciousness or awareness, right? So like when you take in oxygen, like when you're awake, you're taking in electrical energy. When you breathe, you're rubbing your lungs against the air the same way that you can rub a balloon against your hair and get the balloon to become charged. When you breathe, you're rubbing your circulatory system against the air, and it's snatching electrons from it the exact same way that the balloon pulls it from your hair. And so that energy is the light behind your eyes, right? You're alive. You're looking out. That energy is your life. So the more the more present you are, like when you're like lifting weights or running or focusing or meditating, you're pressing your mind, you're putting an electrical density on your body that starts to charge the body. And it gets more and more and more energy, and then that energy has to be put into different containers. So you start like developing like musculature to store all the energy that you're getting from the friction between the mind and the body, right? So you lift weights, and that helps you with the mental conductance. Or when you're doing dancing, like a single routine is, it shapes the body because you are you're using the movement to keep the mind in contact with the body in the same direction for a long period of time. So it just starts to rub electrical energy off on the body, which vitalizes the tissue. So really, it's like, to understand science, you really have to be doing a discipline or doing a practice by which you understand the process by which you become more alive and know how to cultivate energy. Like, you have to learn how to cultivate energy, because that's what you're studying, and then that energy is what you're using to understand the phenomenon that you're studying. It's that cultivated mental energy, that aliveness, that life force is the thing that you think with. So if you're going to do science, you have to understand exercise, which is, that's the original science. That's the alchemy. That's the, how do I rub my mind against my body so that my mind and my body become magnetized together, or that my mind is in my body, is the energy by which I like generate force or do like whatever. That's legit. That's the physics, right? So it's like, that's the only way that you can validate scientific truth, right? It's electricity is exactly like exercise, and you see that some people like there's people out there that know bread and butter how to teach anybody how to do a one-arm handstand, one-arm chin-up, capoeira, dance stuff, just be fluid, acrobatic. Like there's methods for teaching anybody the movement sensitivity of like a Tai Chi master. That exists, it's known to exist, it's proven, it's validated. The people that do it glow, the people that, and then there's the opposite of that, the people that don't do any sort of energy cultivation, that like sort of fall apart physically and mentally. Like, it's known. Everybody knows about it. I've always thought this is fascinating, because everybody knows about the different outcomes, but it's like, there's not a, there's a certain cultural wealth of, is there anybody that has the ability to comprehend the stuff at a simple way to teach it? Or I don't know why it's not taught, right? I was, you can learn how to exercise in these very like ways that are like very unconscious, very unthinking, and very like unaware of what's causing what. Or there's people that have had it like figured out for sort of hundreds of years and have it very, very dialed in. So back to the physics though, like, so there's a proton matrix underneath all objects. Like, so all of these electrons are bound together with this electrical energy flowing between them. You could it probably looks something like plasma arcs, like Birkeland currents, electrical tornadoes reaching out between different sort of planetary or solar system spheroids, right? This probably looks very much like you see in galaxies. The nature by which structures are tied together electrically, it's a self-organizing like fractal pattern. So it's something like some sort of natural current flow, which adopts like double helical patterns. It forms cell structures, membrane structures, to relay like huge currents of unimaginably large amounts of current at different scales of the fractal. Right? So that's everything. And so metals, like, we're getting into the place where you can see electricity most readily is in metals, because metals have enough extra free electricity in them, like their field, their electron orbitals, that vibrational pattern at the core of like copper is low enough that the protons are holding way more electrons than the atom can actually hold on to. So that's why those elements are electrically like wealthy. They have more electrons than they can hold on to. So then when you have a bunch of them together, they're bonded together, but then they have this whole sort of extra ocean of electricity that's just sitting there free, not being used to bond directly, but just sort of circulating among everything, right? It's the structure of wealth. It's the structure of a wealthy society, right? A wealthy society is everyone is overproducing like by 50% and then distributing that, ideally. So that gives you this like fluid, that gives you this bending ability, like everything is like connected. That's the inner flowing economy circulating. And so that's happening with gold, silver, copper. It's obviously like similar varying degrees. Currency, that's why it's called currency, right? And so these things like these patterns happen fractally. Like when you look at the way that the energy of wealth is flowing, it's going to behave the same way that energy flows in gold, or the same way that energy flows in wherever. So that's why the exercise and the self-polarization to where you're knowing how to increase your life force is so important, because the pattern that you're studying in science, be it looking through a microscope or looking at your own thoughts, right? A lot of this stuff is from looking at your own thoughts. Like most of this, all of Einstein's stuff, it was all developed from like a thought experiment. So a lot of today's science has been developed from the study of thinking, which it's a little bit easier to study reality. And there's not as much potential for delusion if you actually just study reality, but there are ways to study your thoughts in such a way that you can learn about reality, because thoughts do exist. So even though they might be imaginary, they do exist, and you can study it, like you're experiencing them. So you can study something that's there when you're experiencing thoughts, and then that you can actually use that to do science and to understand the nature of reality. So like a charged situation is also simulating like wealth or whatever, right? So if you pump electricity into an area, it simulates charge and it increases conductance. It increases the currency. So with magnetism, using copper, using these like electrically wealthy metals, you can actually use them in a way to like funnel wealth from electrically poor areas or electrically rich areas to electrically poor areas, right? But this tends to make the world fall out of balance in a weird way. So it's just interesting to look at the pattern. I don't know what the solution is, but the pattern is, to me, it's pretty fascinating if you can start to see there's a symbolic coherence to how things lay themselves out, linguistically, mathematically. So when you can charge an area, and then that increases the amount of electricity around the atoms, right? So if you put too much electricity around an atom, it starts to become charged and it can like discharge out. And that whole thing, it kind of can get like destructive, the same way that like giving somebody $1 million is kind of like destructive to them. The energy goes through in these crazy ways and burns itself out. So that happens at the material level. If you pump too much energy into something, it actually causes damage. And that's like, or if you breathe pure oxygen for a long time, you'll start to hemorrhage. It'll burn your lungs. It's too much energy. It's too much wealth. Right. So as you study science and stuff, you can actually see the patterns that most people see when they're studying like wisdom traditions. The truth of the wisdom traditions is actually also there in science, which is pretty cool. It's like the same rules and the same laws of like what is good, true, and beautiful actually do create an ordered like material or energetic reality. How are we out of time? 20, we're good. Let's see if we can get this to 30 minutes, right? So this field, this electrical field, this electrical sea, the scale of it, as far as they can tell, is something like the positive area is about the size of a tennis ball or maybe a football in really heavy elements. And then the electrical field is like about the size of a stadium. And then the protons in the middle are kind of like speakers. And so it's noise, depending on how the speaker's oriented, it can be focused in a direction or like focused in a narrow direction, broadcast up, broadcast down, or sort of radiating out all around. And that's like the different frequency or orbital patterns that you see in molecular orbitals. So all that football stadium is kind of can be nowhere and like shown like a flashlight. And so, but it's just like that, it's like that much water sort of in a particular shape. And so that it's all negative, right? All of it's all negative electricity. Even if you've put, this is why objects like repel each other. So you go, oh, if something's like, why doesn't this electricity like merge with each other or whatever? It's within the environment or the field of the object itself, the positive and it's all negative, but relative to itself, the stuff that's mounted up in a wave, that's negative or positive relative to the void or the vacancy. So any pile of charge is positive or wants to flow out into the negative voids. But that's a different polarity from the polarity between the proton and the electron shell, right? Which is more, that's more similar to gravity. That's how gravity and electromagnetism relate with each other, is that it's gravity and electromagnetism are, like, I don't know if you would want to call it the same force. I mean, it's like gravity is the positive holding the negative electrochemical thing to the atom. And then the up and down induced by some sort of induction, like a power plant, like sending magnets through coils, causing an induction, causing a wave pattern in that field, or the accumulation of charge, like a battery or a balloon rubbing on your hair, that's a lifting up of this electrical field, and then that causes an attraction to anything lower than it. So those are the magnetic field lines. This wants to go here. So it's usually lower. It's lower in all directions, right? So the magnetic field lines of this type of charge, that's the electric force, is that desire to go down or desire to go to ground. And then the magnetic force is the current or the movement of water, right? The electric force is the height, which can induce magnetism if you let go of the height and it's allowed to flow. But so the height is the electric, the flow is the magnetic. And then this is gravity. So gravity is actually, I think, probably something similar to what they think the strong force is or whatever. It's like this, except underneath all of reality, right? So this is happening at the atomic level, and then gravity is gravity is the desire of the ether to go towards flat. Gravity is the desire of the electromagnetic force, which is creating protons and electrons. So this is static and fractal, so we don't need to dive into it because it gets paradoxical and confusing, right? So an electromagnetic wave So DC current is just piling up water in a water tower and then opening a valve, flows through, goes out. That's DC. Charge. Makes pretty good sense. Some of this stuff might be happening in the field. I don't know if, I don't think there's no reason to think about electricity accurately. It blows your mind because it's like it's outside this dimension, so there's no reason to actually think about it accurately. You might as well just think about it using the analogical metaphors, and then only try and contemplate it accurately if you've got like a problem and need to apply pressure to yourself. It's almost like a massage. Like if you try and think about it accurately, you're pushing into yourself to a degree that you could hurt yourself by pushing into yourself too hard. But you could also use it kind of like a massage, or use it as a game, like move, do a dodging game or pressing or exercise, right? So we're doing that. So as an electromagnetic wave goes out, which is photon, which is light, an electromagnetic wave travels on the surface of the ether, which is where all the magnetic field lines are. So an electromagnetic wave is a ripple in the electromagnetic force. It's in this surface. So anytime you're receiving a photon from something, like anytime you can see something, you're actually you're connected to it. There's a field line between you and it, and that field line is the surface that the photon rode to get to you. And as it got to you, the electric force, as it moved through reality, it lifted charge up. It lifted the ether up into a charge, which would be called a photon. And as it goes by, it lets the ether fall back down to baseline. So this non-physical wave is lifting electromagnetic energy up and giving it enough, it's like carrying the energy. So when it runs into something, it can induce current and movement in that electromagnetic energy when it crashes into its destination, just like a wave dumps all of its energy into the coastline. And so as it moves through reality, this magnetic field, the current in the water has to rotate. So look at the video I have posted under this. And as the wave goes by, the electric field comes up, a pile of water is created. So that pile of water has an electric field that wants to fall down because the water's heavy. And then also the reason that the water is piling up is because the magnetic field is rotating. So when charge goes through a wire, when you send electricity through a wire, if it's moving that way, there's a magnetic field that pops up and spins around the wire. So the same way that this rotation of the water allows for the charge, this is where the charge exists, the putting charge into a wire similarly causes a rotation of ether like around the wire. Just like this is it's like the bulk of the water is surrounding and supporting everything that the surface is doing in all directions in a way that is dimensionally like higher, right? So the bulk of the water that is not the surface is all wave patterns on the surface are supported by the surface. So as the wave pattern goes by, this subsurface water engages in this circular rotational pattern that is below and transcendent of, but connected to and not separate from the pattern of the surface. It's causing it. So as the mound of charge moves through the wire, same thing has to be happening to the magnetic field. It's rotating, and that rotation is driving the charge into the wire the same way that the rotation here is driving the water up from flat. So there's a rotation of the water as the wave goes by that lifts the water up from flat. And that's the same rotation in a wire as the charge goes by. So it's lifted up from flat, which would be neutral, right? Normally the wire would be neutral. And then when you put a charge through it or send a wave through it, then that is not neutral. So a mound of water has to lift up. And the only way that that mound of water moves is with the rotation of the magnetic field around the wire. And so also as you put that up into a higher dimensional thing, I'll put it, you can have a wave moving through a medium, not just on the surface, but as it moves through a medium, if you're trying to think of a higher dimensional object, of a torus, like a donut, like a bubble ring. I used to blow them in swim practice, like from the deep end, you can blow a bubble ring. And so if you have a perfectly balanced charge, right, if an air molecule at the bottom of the water is a charge, it wants to go that way. And if it's perfectly balanced, a hole opens up in the middle and the whole thing turns into like a five-dimensional wheel. And lo and behold, it's like a wave moving through a medium, not just on the surface, and it's like actually become an object. Even though everything seems like a wave, here it is capable of becoming, it's like an object. It's not wrong. It's actually the most balanced state of this whole system, to where you go, oh, there's no objects because it's a wave, is that torus or that vortex, and that's actually it can be an object, which is wild. Anyway, where are we at? 33:56. That's good. So yeah, it's just food for thought. And then if you can start talking or thinking, once you learn how to connect the physics terms and the equations to the behavior of water that you can see, imagine, experience, like you're made out of it, you drink it, you can surf it, you can swim in it. And so if you see how it's describing electricity, you can get very intuitively smart at all of this physics stuff, because it's all known to be electricity. Like the reason you're not falling through stuff is because of the magnetic repulsion. That electrical field is pushing off of itself. So that's the sense of touch, and then it's also reflecting light. Light, everything's coming from that sea of electricity around the protons. So like we're in this world, we're in this bubble surrounded by electron which is the outside of all atoms. Like the outside of all substance is this electricity. So we're in this bubble, and then there's this electrical world between us, and then this positive world of the protons that's sort of like the other side of our world. We see this negative electrical side of this electron-proton interaction. So it's like we're yeah, so all the electricity is here, and then we're here. So this is all the electrons field is part of us. It's all we can see of our body. Like our body, that's all of this electricity. And then so the inside of us is this proton thing at our core, and then also the inside of like everything that we would touch or look at is also this positive proton core on the other side of this like veil, the other side of this electrical curtain that we call the electromagnetic force. Okay, so this isn't even any woo. It's just fun. It's just like that's legit what it is. So like we don't see past it. We can't see into atoms. We see the surface of the atoms, and the surface of the atoms is this electrical field that they conduct electricity with, that they grab each other with, they bond to each other with, they form our body with. Like the energy of our metabolism moves through this electrical field, similar to ocean waves, similar to the way the water cycle. Right, the energy of our metabolism is very similar to like the energy that you see moving through the climate or the solar system. So it's just cool to have that overview, and then as you learn it, you're like it gives you it's easier to learn something when you already understand it. So you can understand anything with like a 30-minute like TED Talk or whatever those inspirational speeches where you get the big picture, you get the big idea, the entire terrain turns on. That big picture understanding is like the light that illuminates everything that you're studying. So it's like you need to have the big picture understanding first, because it's like operating in daylight. And if you don't have a functional big picture understanding, then it's like you shouldn't be studying the thing. Or I mean, you could, but it's similar to working at night. Some stuff does need to be done at night. Some things you do some things at night, but most of the stuff, daylight helps. All right, go science.